to Philadelphia Airport. A few months have passed since our last visit and things remain dynamic. Summer season is peak traffic season, and yet airlines connecting the US and Canada experience a significant drop in passenger numbers as Spirit Airlines brings back an old friend one last time. PHL isn't for the faint-hearted, as we will find out over the coming months. A big hurdle for the future development of the airport has been a noticeable lack of equipment. This seems to be an issue the airport management has managed to improve upon, but staff shortages remain a challenge. During this peak season, airlines are operating more routes with increased frequencies. A notable exception is traffic between the US and Canada, but also the transatlantic traffic between the US and Europe has some significant indicators showing possible challenges ahead. If the beginning of a long-term cooldown, it couldn't come at a worse time for the airport, with its large infrastructure projects relying on growth for profitability. Over at Terminal 1A Pier, we find a Delta Airlines 737-900ER that is connecting Philadelphia with the airline's hub in Atlanta. Some last pieces of luggage are being loaded before the plane can get on its way for an on-time departure. In the ramp next to the Delta Airlines, we find a rather elegant-looking Airbus A320 of United Airlines featuring this really brilliant retro livery of the airline. The aircraft has today been deployed on the route between Philadelphia and Chicago. After having arrived, last pieces of luggage are being offloaded, and soon the preparations for the departure in about 45 minutes will begin. After Spirit Airlines had retired the airline's Airbus A319 fleet ahead of time, a group of aviation enthusiasts had come together to convince the airline to organize a special farewell flight. After the aircraft has come in from Atlanta, the aircraft is now being prepared for this special flight, with a flight plan up and down parts of the US East Coast before returning to Philadelphia. An airline seen much less here at the airport than in the past is Southwest Airlines. They do, however, still operate a few routes out of Philadelphia, like with this 737-700 operating between Philadelphia and Chicago. And there are some positive signs from the airline indicating that the airline might increase its presence in Philadelphia again in the near future. The challenges with decreased bookings is impacting Air Canada, who have reacted with reduced capacities and frequencies on their US flights. This is also the case at PHL, where we find today's only Canada-bound flight in form of the CRJ 900. The aircraft is about to be closed down and therefore getting ready for its departure to Toronto. Now over at B Concourse, we of course find a lot of American Airlines traffic, given that this is the American Airlines and Oneworld Partners terminal of the airport. And coming into the ramp right now is the 737-800 of American Airlines arriving from Charleston. The aircraft will have a little over 40 minutes in the ramp until its departure to Chicago. And in the ramp next to the arriving 737, we have another 737 of American Airlines, but in this case the MAX 8 variant. The aircraft is pretty much in the middle of its turnaround, arriving about half an hour ago from Miami and having a little over half an hour left until its next departure, bringing the aircraft to New Orleans. The ground crews are already working on the outbound flight. Next up, we have an Airbus A319 of American Airlines that is in a little bit of trouble. The aircraft arrived from Jacksonville and has about 15 minutes left until its departure to Boston. But the turnaround hasn't been as smooth as hoped for and is in fact not going to be completed on time. That is a certainty, as the aircraft hasn't even started boarding yet. Catering is, for example, also still at the aircraft. So hopefully the delay won't be too big in the end. Then we can also look at the 737-800 in the ramp next to the A319. This is an aircraft that today has been deployed by American Airlines on the route between Philadelphia and Dallas. And after having arrived a few minutes ago, the aircraft is still being offloaded. Once that is completed, the aircraft will be starting to prepare for its outbound flight. Now at the far end of B Concourse, we do find the CRJ-900 of American Eagle. The aircraft has come in from Pittsburgh, and the last pieces of luggage from the inbound flight are currently being driven away from the aircraft towards the luggage distribution. Now the aircraft will be prepared for a flight to Windsor Lux, leaving in about 25 minutes time. Over at the other side of the B Concourse, we find some international traffic in form of this Airbus A350-900 of Spanish flag carrier Iberia, which is of course part of the IAG group, which also incorporates Aer Lingus and British Airways among others. The aircraft has come in earlier this afternoon from Madrid, and the aircraft is currently being offloaded, and once that is done, it will be pulled over to a remote position before it then will return to the gate area here at B Concourse for its return flight back to Madrid later this evening. Also part of the IAG group is Aer Lingus, and today we find an Airbus A330-300 of the Irish carrier here in Philadelphia. The airline is, however, not operating on this flight from Dublin, but rather from Manchester, from where Aer Lingus, on behalf of IAG, is operating an intercontinental hub. One of the routes bringing the aircraft here to Philadelphia, which arrived about 2 hours ago here at the airport and has a little bit over 1 hour left until its return flight back to Manchester in the United Kingdom. Much more local in its routing is the ERJ-175 of American Eagle that earlier today arrived from Cleveland and now in 10 minutes time is supposed to be leaving for a flight to Indianapolis. But there is still some activities around the aircraft. It might end up with a few minutes delay. And the first aircraft we find today docking at a gate at the Terminal 1C Concourse is the 737-800 of American Airlines that about half an hour ago arrived from Raleigh-Durham and still has about half an hour until its next flight out to Orlando. So we are slap bang in the middle of the turnaround of this aircraft. So far things are going fairly smoothly. At least there are no complaints from ground crews so far. And how is the situation over at the next aircraft? This Airbus A321neo of American Airlines arrived not so long ago from Las Vegas and will have some time now here at almost 1 hour until its next scheduled flight, leaving for Los Angeles LAX, which means the aircraft is still being offloaded from its inbound flight before preparations can start for the outbound flight. And in the ramp next to the A321, we find a Dreamliner of American Airlines in form of a 787-8. This aircraft arrived about half an hour ago from Edinburgh in Scotland and will remain here at the ramp for quite some time until a later afternoon departure, bringing the aircraft back to Europe, but in this case to the Greek capital, Athens. Now, taxiing past all the action in the ramp so far at least is the 777-200ER of American Airlines, arriving with about half an hour delay from London Heathrow. The aircraft that currently is taxiing towards its ramp will later this evening be heading back out to Europe, but this time to Zurich in Switzerland. In one of the remote ramps, we find an Airbus A321neo of American Airlines that about 1.5 hours ago arrived from Denver and has been remaining here in the ramp ever since. But in about 25 minutes, the aircraft will be heading towards Las Vegas. A first bus with passengers is arriving, so boarding is just about to begin. So an on-time departure should still be possible for this aircraft. Next up, we find a CRJ-900 of American Eagle that this morning was part of the morning traffic wave in and out of Philadelphia, but after having arrived at 27 minutes past 9 in the morning from Memphis, it has then been taken out of the active service and put into the tactical reserve, where it will be remaining until about 20 minutes past 5 in the afternoon, when it re-enters active service with a flight to Norfolk. Third in line for departure on runway 27 right is this Airbus A320-200 of Allegiant Air. The aircraft arrived earlier today from Cincinnati and will now be heading back out to Cincinnati after about an hour here in Philadelphia. Second in line for a 27 right departure today is the JetBlue A320. There is some significant news coming from the airline, but more on that later in our tour around the airport. But this aircraft is getting ready for a departure to New York JFK, from where it also arrived earlier today. And first in line for the 27 right departure and about to line up on the runway is the ERJ 175 of American Eagle that about 45 minutes ago arrived from Boston Logan and is now getting ready for a flight out to New York LaGuardia. Before we head over to Terminals 2 and 3, we can make a quick stop at the Bongo Inn. The hotel management is currently in a meeting with a potential customer interested in renting the hotel's facilities for an upcoming event. The Society for Chronic Procrastinators are looking at their options for an event at the hotel, but so far the meeting seems to be going nowhere. Terminal 2, we can see the afternoon wave of intercontinental traffic settling in, and so we find an Airbus A350-900 of Qatar Airways taxiing towards its stand at Terminal 2 after having arrived from Doha. This is of course also where the aircraft will be returning to after a couple of hours in the ramp at PHL Terminal 2. And to be fair, it is a fairly similar story for this Dreamliner 787-9 of Lufthansa, although not with a destination Doha, rather Frankfurt in Germany, from where it has just arrived and at 20 minutes to 4 in the afternoon is scheduled to be leaving again. So we do hope for a problem-free turnaround, just like with the company A380 of Lufthansa that is already sitting in the ramp after it arrived from the airline's hub in Munich. And it is really buzzing around this super with loads of activities in the ramp. Ground crews are really pulling in a shift to make sure that this aircraft can be leaving on time. The return flight to Munich is scheduled at 20 minutes to 3 in the afternoon. Also, LOT Polish Airlines is an airline that can regularly be found at Philadelphia. Today they have deployed a 787-8 on the route between Warsaw and Philadelphia. There is already some activity starting to prepare the aircraft for its later afternoon return flight back to the Polish capital, but the pace around the aircraft will of course pick up quite significantly as we get closer to the departure time. Another mighty Airbus A380 has found its way today to Philadelphia in form of this A380 of Emirates Airlines that has arrived about 20 minutes ago. Thus, the aircraft is still being offloaded with cargo and luggage, and even passengers are still deboarding. But that is of course about to be completed, and once that is then the case, the aircraft will start preparing for the return flight back to Dubai. Also a recent arrival is the Etihad Airways Dreamliner 787-9 in this very special Formula 1 livery of the airline. Also here the aircraft is still being offloaded from its inbound flight, and then it will be prepared for its return flight back to Abu Dhabi. Terminal 3, also unofficially known as the airport's South America hub, is the base of many SkyTeam member airlines at PHL, and so we find a Boeing 737 MAX 8 of Aeromexico that has been deployed on today's flight of the airline between Philadelphia and Mexico City. With still 37 minutes until departure, ground crews are slowly beginning the preparations for the outbound flight. Not a SkyTeam member, but certainly with its origins in South America, Copa Airlines can today be found at Terminal 3 with a 737 MAX 9. The airline is operating on the route between Philadelphia and Panama City and has arrived about 40 minutes ago. Now the aircraft is being prepared for its return flight. Luggage is already being loaded, the crew has entered the aircraft and is starting its preparations for the return flight as well. Next up, we find a Boeing 737 MAX 8 of Cayman Airways that has come in from Georgetown, to where it of course also will be returning. But there are only 23 minutes left on the clock, and due to a late arrival of the aircraft, it is doubtful if ground crews can actually manage to turn around the aircraft in time. So a slightly delayed departure seems fairly likely in this case. On the other side of Terminal 3, we find a new but not so new arrival at Philadelphia, as Saudia has picked up flights again connecting Jeddah with Philadelphia, beginning with the summer timetable. If this will be a year-round route has not yet been announced by Saudia, but at least for the summer timetable, the route does seem to be secured. The aircraft arrived about half an hour ago and will later this afternoon return to Saudi Arabia. So while Saudia after a break has returned to Philadelphia, an airline that has been a regular sight here at the airport for many years is Air France. And also today we can find a Boeing 777-300ER connecting the French capital Paris with Philadelphia at the east coast of the US. Ground crews are still loading cargo into the hold of the aircraft, and they have about 35 minutes to complete this task for an on-time departure. JetBlue has long been rumored wanting to establish a larger base out of Philadelphia, and after the airline recently announced a new partnership with United Airlines, there is now more news coming from the airline. In one of the remote stands, we find a ERJ 190 of JetBlue. A delegation of the airline arrived this morning to finalize an agreement with the airport, which will see the establishment of a new hub for JetBlue at the airport. Rumors had been circulating for months, but today it seems to become reality. Another very special visitor can be found here at the airport today at one of the remote stands in form of this Boeing 777-300ER of the Japanese Air Self-Defense Forces, or the Japanese government. A delegation has arrived to the US some time ago and has spent some time at the US West Coast, and today arrived here in Philadelphia at the East Coast, where the aircraft will remain, at least according to the current schedule, until later this evening. This might, however, still change. And with that, we have reached the end of today's airport tour. The historic announcement of JetBlue wanting to open a base of operations out of Philadelphia didn't come as a surprise to insiders, but comes at a great time for the airport, facing uncertainties. Especially the decision also to operate transatlantic flights has been noted positively by the PHL management. How the airport's biggest customer, American Airlines, will react to the announcement remains to be seen.